And God should help us, help our nation to stand strong for the people of Israel. And let us not waver in that. And Lord, give us some people that'll stand and proclaim the truth. And we'll love you and thank you and praise you in Jesus' name and for Jesus' sake. Amen and amen. I want you to notice in 1 Samuel chapter 17, and I want to show you what I missed so many years in my preaching, and God has focused my attention on it in probably the last 5 years of my life. Now, you know what this chapter is all about, right? It's the battle between Israel and the Philistines. And you realize that every day, for 40 days, a champion of Goliath would come out and challenge and defy the armies of God. And we have preached about conquering the giants in your life. We have preached about the great victory God gave David and how we focused on him being a lad and all of that. But there's something that really connects to my heart that I never really got a hold of in this chapter. First of all, I want you to notice that would be twice a day. That would be 80 times that champion would come down and challenge the people of God, and nobody would respond to that or answer that challenge. You'll find in the Bible, if you look with me, in verse number 9 of this chapter, you look with me, here's what it's all about. Verse number 9, if he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then ye shall be our servants and serve us. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that may fight. We may fight together. Now, when you look at that, the next verse tells us where they are. When Saul and all Israel heard the words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now, when you focus on this unfolding of this chapter, Saul and the armies of Israel was mainly focusing on his size. We know that when he's introduced to us, they talk about his size. They talk about everything that he has. And they were succumbed by his size for 40 days. And there they are twice a day hearing, but they're seeing him more than they're hearing him. Once they heard him, they were greatly afraid. Now let me introduce where I'm going. We have a King James Bible. Is that correct? And God tells us it is sharper than any two-edged sword. Is that correct? Now, the point of that sword is the gospel. No matter how you wield it, spin it, turn it, use it, the point that pierces people is the gospel. So the gospel is given on one side of that sword that men may be free. Is that right? Who the Son shall set free, they shall be free indeed. But we as Baptists have only wielded that sword that direction. We've only swung it toward the souls of men, and that is a good thing to be in our DNA. But to have it balanced, ladies and gentlemen, people can be free from the penalty and judgment of sin, but they can be yoked under bondage governmentally. The other side of that sword, which is balanced, and the gospel's used in both of them, is the side of government. The story I read to you is not about gospel. The story I read to you tonight, in context, is about government fighting with another nation. Is that right? We like contextual principle, let's stay with it. It is a government fighting a government, a nation fighting a nation, and now you have to deal with, are we going to be free or are we going to be enslaved? So our forefathers were free because of the gospel, but they were not free governmentally. They didn't have a free government. God placed in their heart to set sail for a nation that they could have, come on, stay with me now, freedom of religion. Now, people say you got to separate God from government. You can't do it. You cannot take God or the gospel out of government, or you'll wind up with tyranny. So our forefathers knew that. They focused on that. And David cried out in this text, if you look further over, he said in the Word of God, and he cried out in verse number 29, I believe that's right, is there not a cause? Is there not a cause? That has echoed from that page all the way over to the founding of America. Is there not a cause? We were a people free by the gospel, but we wasn't free from the government. We was under tyranny. They were trying to force a state church on us. They want them to bow over to the state church. But our forefathers and our patriots said, no, we've had enough. So they wielded the gospel and they wielded the government with their Bible. Now, you understand what I'm trying to get you to see here tonight in this context. We are seeing the size of the opposition. We are intimidated by the size of the opposition. I don't care how big they say they are and how many they think they are. This battle you and I are in is not ours, it's the Lord's. And the battle we are facing in our nation, ladies and gentlemen, it is also a spiritual battle, but it is a political battle that we cannot have the luxury of staying out of any longer. When David heard that giant say that one time, he didn't fear, he didn't back up, he didn't quit. He said, I'm going to ask you a question. What's going to be done to the man that shuts his mouth? Well, Saul had tried to buy his army, and they wouldn't go. Saul had tried to bribe them. I'll let you be in my family and marry my daughter. She must have been some ugly woman. Because nobody was willing to die for her. Right? Well, explain it to me why they didn't do it. It's either the size of the giant or the ugliness of the woman. I don't know which. But the prospect of being set free and being in the king's family ought to have been enough. You see what I focus in on tonight, ladies and gentlemen? It was such a disarray that they heard them defile God. They defied the armies of God. They defied Israel. And they could not find enough strength or courage to get up because they was afraid of the mandate. You got to wear the mask. They was afraid of something they couldn't see, but they was afraid of what they was hearing. David wasn't afraid of what he heard or what he saw. He said to that crowd, I'll tell you what I think I'll do. I'll come down here to bring refreshments, and this is really none of my business. His character was such that he left even his chariot with a keeper. He left the sheep of his father with a keeper. He didn't go there because he wanted to. He went there because his father told him to go. Now he's in the will of his father, going to try to refresh his brethren, and they could criticize him. And they fussed at him. And they were rhino Republicans, I believe. And they were totally against everything that God wanted somebody to do. So you know all the story now. Let me get to where I want to go. Brethren, I'm going to show you something here. And I want to tell you something. I want everybody to be able to see that. Can y'all see that? Can you see it? Okay. So here we are. How many's got $1? Have you? I know we're Baptists. That's going to be hard to find $1, but maybe you can borrow one. I want to show you something. How many has $1? Wave it high. I ain't going to come get it. All right, I want you to fold it. You see where I've got this folded? George is on the front. Fold him where you can't see him. Then you see the big pyramid. Fold it over where you don't see that anymore. And all you see is a circle with an eagle on it. You see that? Looks like there's a crest sitting under it. Now, let me just let you get there. I'm going to let you borrow it. Who needs to borrow this? I got my DNA on it, and I will get it back. Now, let's go back, brethren, to our founding. It's back in the early days of our founding. Everything hinges on the desire of our forefathers that were willing to stand up against tyranny. They wasn't rich men, some were. Some had land, some had nothing. But they all joined hands and said, live or die, I must stand up against this tyranny. And so they did. Once they began to challenge the greatest world-known army and fleet of sail ships of its day, now the battle's on. You had the regulars, and then you had the deserters. You had those that was wanting to stay with the Brits and those that wasn't. And so there was a division among the colonists. They wasn't sure if they wanted to start this because they wasn't sure they could finish it. But then it started more pressure, and here's what happened. You want to know what happened? Over in Britain, the word was given out. If you can stop the fire out of the pulpit, you can stop the fire out of those bunch of rebels, and they will not want to raise up and fight this great army. So they set sail to try to shut preachers down, but they couldn't do it. And every time they'd go to Nathaniel Hall, and they'd have them Nathaniel Hall meetings, It was a leather-lung preacher that got to preaching about liberty and preaching about freedom, and guess who was willing to die for it? The saved, born-again child of God. They didn't have nothing to lose. They going to go to heaven if they died, but they wanted to know if God was going to be on their side. So they banded together. They formed the Continental U.S. Army. Now the war's on. We all know about Francis Scott Key and his national anthem. We know that story. Over at Baltimore, Maryland, if you hadn't been, you need to go. We all know how that the Brits was overtaken. We all seen the picture. How many have seen the picture of George Washington bowing beside a white horse under a tree? You ever seen that? You know what that prayer time is depicting? He was praying to the God of heaven that God would supply the finances to buy the material that they could fight the Brits. I told you the other night, I believe. And God raised up a Jew by the name of Haim Solomon. He stepped up and loaned the Continental U.S. Army $600,000. Now, isn't it amazing? I'm going to tell you something. This is amazing. You want to know how many words is in your King James Bible from Genesis 1 all the way over to Deuteronomy to the last word? It's called the Pentateuch. There's 600,000 words. Isn't it amazing? Isn't it a coincidence that God loaned $600,000 to a Jew to this Continental Army? Isn't it amazing that same Continental Army picked up the same Bible with 600,000 words in the Pentateuch? Isn't it amazing that the founding of our country was based on the foundation of the first books of the Bible? Is anybody listening to me? Now, did you realize that George Washington claimed to have gotten saved? And did you realize that history says that he was baptized by a Baptist preacher? Did you know that? How many ever knew that? It is debatable by some theologians, but it's in record that he was baptized by a Baptist preacher. Now you have this commander of the U.S. forces, which is a Continental Army, being identified by a Baptist preacher in submersion. Now, should Baptists stay out of politics? Should Baptists stay out of the army? Should Baptists stay quiet and silent? No. What's happened to us all these years? We've been intimidated by their size. We have been frustrated by what they're doing. But David wasn't paying attention to the size. He was hearing what they're saying. We're coming after your children. What does that sound like? Well, they belong to the government. What's that sound like? You think our forefathers would have put up with that foolishness? The Brits was awful big, brethren, but they wasn't paying attention to the size. They was motivated by what they said. Now, we better wake up to the fact that they ain't playing. And we better wake up to the fact they're coming. It's a matter of time. And we do not, brethren, have the luxury of sitting by quiet and idle any longer. Now watch. Now look at your dollar bill. Look at it real good. Miss Katie, have you ever noticed what's right there in that circle? Can you describe to people what you see? What do you say? It's star. Does it look anything like this star? What is that star? What is that star? So did you know on your dollar bill that the U.S. Treasury put a Baptist on the front of it. Is anybody listening to me? Did you know that on it they put "In God We Trust"? Did you know that on that dollar bill they said, we're going to recognize the man that paid for the war that was a Jew, and we're going to immortalize his offering on our dollar bill with a Baptist on the front and a Jew on the back? Somebody help me now. Now, I know you won't find that out in the history books, in secular world, but you research history, honey, you'll find out what I'm telling you is right. Now, let's get to where I want to go. Should we, as Altman Baptist Church, be quiet? Now, stay with me. In the struggle for America to have her birth, God raised up a Jew that supplied the money, that bought the materials, that you and I could have this free nation that we're living in today. And somebody said, should we love the Jew? Should we care about the Jew? Are you kidding me, honey? Now watch this. Right here is depicting the story of what I'm fixing to tell you. We all know what the B stands for, right? Somebody say it out loud. Baptist. Why is it Baptist? We're Baptist because we identify with Baptist doctrine. So Baptist doctrine is what we identify as Baptist. We're not ashamed of it. Zion, Z is for Zionist. I tried to explain that the other night. Let's go over it again. If you are a Bible believer and you believe that God gave a promise to Abraham and to his seed, it's not a dirty word, it's not a bad word, that just identifies your belief that the land belongs to Israel and it makes you a Zionist. Would you say that you're that? Public. We're dealing with the public all the time. The gospel. You can't leave the gospel out. Public affairs. Affairs means what's happening with what we're doing here at Altman, here at Indiana, PA, here in this county, next county, all the way down to where is it? Harrisburg? Is that the capital? From the capital of Harrisburg, there ought to be somebody representing Baptist Zionists about the public affairs, and we're a committee that tells them, we want you to understand, if you want our vote, you want our help, why don't you start standing up for what we believe? Is that hard to understand? All right, now watch this. Let's fast forward now to the days of the late 30s after World War I. Hitler and his big war machine is jockeying around trying to get position that he could become the dictator of Germany. Germany's in disarray, so he wiggles in, and little by little, he takes away their freedom. Little by little, he starts telling what to do, and everybody said it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. Everybody gets complacive, everybody gets comfortable, and then they put the little star of David on all the Jews. Why are you doing that? Oh, we just want to separate, make sure everybody's safe. So he begins to come up with his plan that's hatched out of the devil's pit, and now he's after annihilating the Jew. He comes along, he starts World War II. Pearl Harbor happened, and now I want to show you something here that really touches my heart. This gentleman you see here is he is right here, graduated from Annapolis, Maryland, Naval Academy, and his detail is on a aircraft carrier. Lied about his age and signed up, and he's 17 right there in active duty. World War II is going on. His ship was the first ship that went through Pearl Harbor that got over in the Pacific. His captain was under Admiral Bull Halsey. Bull Halsey would be about like Patton on the water. They didn't play. They wanted to get it done. Was send out squadrons of them Mustang bombers and fighters with one insignia on it, sent out another squadron with another insignia on it, sent out 8 different squadrons with different patterns on their plane, making that Japanese fleet think, there's 8 aircraft carriers coming after us. His captain turned around a whole fleet, a battle fleet that was headed toward Midway. Dad was a gunner. 20-millimeter cannon on the starboard side. And I'll tell you a story when I get ready to get done. D-Day's now. Normandy's happened. Patton's with his army fighting the Germans. Now all of this is going on. They break through. Have you ever heard of 101st Airborne Division out of Hopkinsville, Kentucky? Did you know that they were called the No Slack Platoon? They was at Bastogne. They're fighting the Germans. They're outgunned, they're outnumbered, they're out of ammunition nearly, and it is a strategic point of the war. And their captain stood up and said, boys, for every one of us that dies, kill 3 of theirs. We're not backing up, and here's what I'm telling you, give them no slack. So they became the No Slack Brigade out of the brave men that fought out of the 101st Airborne and turned the tide of that war. And now Hitler's off the scene. Japan's laid down their arms, and the War II is over. Brother Harvey's dad was there, was he not? Would y'all give me just a few minutes, and I'm going to close here. You remember the number 600,000? Now there's a regathering over into Israel. They're coming from war-torn parts of the world, going back to their homeland. They still know their language. They still have their religion. They still know their heritage. They don't have to come back after all them years and relearn everything. They kept it the whole time. So they march in their land, and now the UN is formed. Now everybody's upset and mad because the UN come up with a resolution called 181 that would allow the Jewish people to become a sovereign state. Nobody knew what to call them. Nobody knew what to name them. So now all the debates going on, and guess who was president? Anybody ever heard of Roosevelt? Guess what Roosevelt done? He was summoned by King Shaw, Brother Jamie. King Shaw had him to come over and had a powwow with him. And I have a picture in some of my books that I study of Roosevelt. How many got upset when you saw Obama bow to a Shaw? You remember that? You know where he learned it from? Roosevelt. Roosevelt bowed to King Shaw. King Shaw said, if you will not ratify that, we'll give you all this oil. Does that sound familiar? So he made up his mind at that meeting that he was going to side with the Saudis against Israel and not ratify the UN resolution. April the 7th, 1948, Amy, guess what God done? Out of nowhere, Roosevelt falls sick. They putting him in the ground. He was an anti-Zionist. He was against them having their land. Guess what the sovereign God of heaven done? Isn't it amazing? You can't put God in a box. He raised up Harry S. Truman. Harry S. Truman was taught in Sunday school about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Harry S. Truman was being persuaded by big donors, by world leaders, do not ratify that resolution or you'll start World War III. So he's in a conundrum, if you would. He don't know what to do. But can I tell you what our God done? He took an old leather-lunged preacher with a King James Bible. Has anybody ever heard of a Baptist preacher by the name of J. Frank Norris? You know what J. Frank Norris did, son? He flew over to the Middle East with a Bible in hand, started preaching out of Genesis 13 and out of Genesis 17, and said, you world leaders better hear what God said. That land belongs to the Jew, and you better keep your hand off of it. It is a promise from God given to them, and they begin to listen. They begin to pay attention. As much as they're paying attention, the devil was. He tried his best to keep it from happening. There's a president sitting in the United States that's been twisted and torn, and then he hears about a Baptist preacher that gets involved in politics. That Baptist preacher, through correspondence and letters by the name of J. Frank Norris, persuades the U.S. sitting president to say, I tell you what we're going to do. May 14th, 1948, 12:06, I believe, if I'm correct, p.m., Harry S. Truman puts everybody out of his office, puts everybody out of his cabinet. He brings in his press secretary and says, put me on national radio. May 14th, 1948, now God's using a Baptist to persuade a president to step up and help a struggling Jewish people that had been, you know how many was killed under Hitler? 6 million. 6 million Jews had been killed. Truman declared that America would stand and ratify the UN resolution. Wonder why that your dad's generation and my dad's generation was called the Great Generation. Wonder why we came out of 2 wars, World War I, World War II, had nothing. Everything tore all apart. Did you know that the same land mass per square mile and acreage is the same as Russia and America? Did you want to know why God blessed this country? Our forefathers, and in my dad's generation, fought that they could liberate those Jews from concentration camps, that they could have freedom. But it was Dad's generation and that president that said, not only are you going to be liberated, we're going to let you have your nation. Anybody know what this represents here? How many times have you seen pictures of that? You know what it is? Somebody say it. Iwo Jima. Anybody ever seen this? Can you get a good look at it? You know what that is, Brother Flory? That is a bunch of little Jews like these Americans for the first time in their life in the land of Israel hoisting up a national flag after a U.S. president declared them to be a nation. You want to know how many Jews was in the land when that happened? I wonder how you knew that. $600,000, 600,000 words, 600,000 Jews in the land. You know what the number 600,000 represents? National redemption. Isn't that a coincidence? You know what that is? That's their Eastern Gate. That's Harry S. Truman. You know what that is? That's one of the heads of states in Israel. That's a scroll right there in their hand. Are you listening to me? You know what this is here? That's their light. Guess what our light is? The King James Bible. Guess where we get our law, our Constitution? You want to know what that is right here? That scroll that I'm touching and speaking of right here is 300 years old. You know where it comes from? It came out of the Holocaust. You want to know who owns it? A Hatfield. You heard of Hatfields and McCoys? A Hatfield owns that. You know how many lambskins it takes to make that? 50. You want to know why he got it? The Jews said it wasn't worth repairing. We're going to auction it off. And my friend, Brother Hatfield, bid on it and won the bid. And them Jews said, you can't have it because you're a Gentile. He said, I got something to tell all y'all. My mama's a full-blooded Jew. And I have touched that. That is open to what is that? Exodus 15, the Song of Moses. Now, let me close with this. Now, why am I so passionate about what I'm doing? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Number one, I prayed about it many years. I've always been active in it. But I didn't have a channel to get all of it out and get involved like I wanted to. Why am I that way? I'm going to tell you why. I hope you let me say this and we'll close. My dad, Brother Andy, from time to time, me being the oldest son, would take me aside and said, son, I need to tell you something. What is it, Dad? He said, are you listening, boy? And I would part way, yeah. And he'd turn me and make me look in his face. And with a fire in his eyes, he said, son, me and my fellow sailors and all the men of my generation fought. Do you hear me, son? They bled and they died. That we could give you a nation with a constitution that you could have freedom. Are you hearing me, son? Yes, Dad. He said, I don't think you're hearing me. Then a tear would come to the side of his eye. He said, you know what my job was on that deck of that ship, son? I said, you was a gunner. He said, yeah, I was something else too, son. Every time we'd have a battle, we'd have to go get cleaned up, shower, and get our dress uniforms on. And my detail was to stand at the door of the morgue with my back beside the door. He said there was 2 other men in front of me. There was 3 over there. Was 6 of us total. And when they brought my fellow sailor out of that morgue, after they prepped his body, draped over him was an American flag. And I had to walk out on that flight deck and hold his lifeless body. He said, son, they were young like me. Some of them was just barely 17 years old. He said they was willing to die. And we all knew we'd probably die if we get out on this ship like sitting ducks in the water. After they said the eulogy and played the taps, you know what my job was, son? To grab that gurney, raise it up as high as I could over my shoulder and hold it while his body slid out from under that flag, wrapped in gauze, and hit that water. He said, you know the sad part, son? I said, no. He said, we never stopped. We kept sailing. We was going to another battle. And he said, son, if you don't get out and vote and stand up for what you believe, you're not worthy of one of them that I had to bury while we're sailing on and they drop in the water. He said, the time will come that you will have to fight to save what we give you. And if you don't do it, don't let them die in vain. If you have to stand alone, stand alone. Don't ever back up or back down. Church, can I ask you a question? Is America worth fighting for? Is America worth fighting for spiritually? That's what you're doing. You're doing missionaries, and we need to. God help you know we need to. But if that's all we do, they're going to march through our door. They're going to do everything they can because they got us in a corner where they want us, and we will not get involved. I'm afraid they'll get upset. What? You know what they're doing now, Jamie? They declare war on America. You know what they're doing right now? They're taking our flags and burning it in our street. They're not ashamed to do it. You know what they're doing now? They took their flag in the U.S. Congress and said, take that. You know what they're doing now? They voted their crowd in, and they was asked today, what do you think about them killing all them little Hebrew babies? What do you think about them cutting their heads off, slitting their throat? You know what they done? They jeered and walked down that hallway, and that reporter was not about to give up, said, hey, can't you answer this question? Can't you answer this question? And some big bodyguard got between her and that Palestinian. She wouldn't even stand up. I'm not afraid and ashamed that she's a Palestinian. But what bothers me, Andy, is she going to live in this country and serve in this country. At least she have the decency of saying, they should have never done that. War's bad, but they shouldn't have killed them little innocent babies. They're killing old people, innocent people, people that can't fight back. They're a bunch of cowards. And we sit back and let that stuff happen, we won't say a word. It's about time we open our mouth and get involved and do something. We need people from this church involved in school boards, mayors, city council members. You said, that ain't right. Well, I know a friend of mine been doing this for 20 years in Tennessee. They got independent Baptist preachers that are senators, still pastoring. Independent Baptist song leaders that are congressmen, still leading singing at a Baptist church. You want to know what stirred all that grief down in Tennessee about? One of them guys walked in with a King James Bible and read it on the house floor. Isn't it amazing? He read the 10 Commandments, and that crowd got all crazy. Well, it's about time we stand up. They do. You said, how can I help? Well, I'll tell you how you can help. God has enabled me, Brother Jason, to meet ambassadors of our nation. Matter of fact, I helped her run in her campaign to become governor of Kentucky. Matter of fact, she lives in a little town about like this one. She was the lady that worked under Donald J. Trump that organized and brokered the Abrahamic Accord. Netanyahu calls her Esther. That's how much they love that lady. You know that God's allowed me to interact with some people over in Israel right now through a channel that I found up in D.C. by the way of a preacher's son that works in the political world for Morton Blackwell, that got me connected with some foreign dignitaries, that got me connected with a guy that sits under Netanyahu. Little old country pumpkin me. Why are you doing that for, Brother Thompson? Because I want them Jewish people to know that there's a bunch of Baptists over here in this country that still love them and thank God for them, and we want to stand up shoulder to shoulder with them. And by the grace of God, I'm going after the first of the year, if all this calms down, taking Bibles in, working about 10 days giving out Bibles. The biggest population of Jews over in Israel right now is Russian Jews. So we got Russian Hebrew Bibles and Ukrainian Hebrew Bibles, English Hebrew Bibles, Hebrew Bible, and walk around and hand them out to them people that are. This guy worked in the IDF, Special Force guy. It was his group of people that got Netanyahu reelected as prime minister. Me and the preacher was going next week to D.C., and I already have 2 or 3 meetings set up with some congressmen, and hopefully Ted Cruz. I've been with him a couple of times. Can you believe that? I got a guy getting me access to the governor of Texas. You believe that? So the Lord is helping us, and I just don't go to shake hands and play nicey-nicey. I want them to answer some tough questions that they can understand. There's some Americans that are still patriotic that want to preserve this country, and where do you stand? You know what politician means? Look it up. It means a man of a city. Look up the definition. That's exactly what it means. And you said politicians are dirty. Well, so is your job. So is the bankers. Do you quit getting involved in banking? Real estate deals? Everybody's bad. There's bad apples everywhere, but there's some good ones. I spoke to Rand Paul, and I'm closing. Sis, come to the piano. I'm sitting eating after I preached over in Russellville, Kentucky, and guess who walked in? Senator Rand Paul. Sat down right beside me at a table right beside me. My wife said, "You know who that is?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, I know who that is." I got up, and when I got up, he got up, and he leaned to the side. Remember when he got beat up at his hometown, right by his yard? He's still hurting. I don't agree with everything all them guys say and do, but I tell you what I do know. I questioned him about the Lord, and he questioned me about my Baptist. I questioned him about his. He'd been to a Baptist church that morning. He said, "Where did you preach?" And I told him, he said, "I know where that church is at." He said, "Well, can you do me a favor, Preacher Thompson?" I said, "I can, Senator, if you want me to. What is it that I can do?" Here's what he said, Jason. What you see on the TV is just a small portion of what we deal with every single day. That crazy bunch is running the hallways, beating on our doors, causing havoc all the time. He said, "Where y'all at?" Where y'all at? You want to know why you think we vote against you? We don't ever hear from you. Issues come up, you don't ever write a letter, you don't ever call, you don't voice your opinion. You can email me. My staff reads them. I pay attention to it. Did you know how you can make your voice be like 10,000? Write your congressman a letter You know what that means? 1 in 10,000 people would write a letter to a congressman. So if you wrote a letter and he put it in his hand, it'd be like 10,000 people. And he'd take real notice of that. You don't have to type it. Write it personal, handwriting. It makes it personal to him. He said, would you do me a big favor? I said, if I can. He said, tell him I want to hear from him. And I want to ask you to do me a big favor. Will you ask him to pray for me? Not everybody up there is crazy. There are some people up there that fear God and know what this mess is all about. And we don't need to throw them all off in a pit like they throw all of us off in a pit. We need to reach out to them, let them hear from us. And if you think they're doing a good job, you know what you ought to do? Fire off an email. Say, I appreciate you standing. Won't you know we're praying? Let's stand to our feet. Thank you.